just to switch together. That'll be fun. Anyway, tonight, just the categories. It'll basically be a clone of what you've already done for the notes, just done with Redux. So with that said, let's jump into the code real quick and close the package up. We don't need that. And I've got the three kind of core files open here, main, app, and navbar. I'm just going to change app and navbar first, just to kind of get them rolling. What we're going to do actually before that is go into the components folder, and I'm going to make a new folder in here called categories. And in there, we'll make 3 files, or 4 files. Category container, category list, category form, and just call it category.js. Let's call it category item. That's probably a bad name. But what I want to do is have files that I can pin things to at this point. So category container, let's make it for now a simple React app. So it's going to be import React from React and class. Categories extends React. I'm going to spell that wrong all night. I'm just warning you now.
As long as you're consistent.
Categories, yeah. And export default categories. And we'll have our constructor. Do we need a constructor? We don't need a constructor. Well, no. For now, we'll just do the bare minimum. Render, return, div, categories. Okay, no surprises there. Plain old hello world React component. We've written these now about 50 times. I'm just going to copy this. And because I can, I'm just going to paste them into here for each of these. Just get these guys set up so we have them. This will be category form. And category item. Really? Do the same thing here. And category list. List, item, form, and the categories. Close them down. Don't need them. Okay. Now the components released their shell scaffold. They're created, so we have them. So now we'll start connecting a little bit. So in the nav bar, let's make a link to it, and we'll do a link to categories. We made changes at some point. This is going to be a Kanban board, so this may end up being the home component at some point. But for now, just to keep using the tools we already have, which is the React router, we'll keep this in place. I don't need the nav bar anymore. I just added a link, and you can see that my link is here. If I click on it, nothing happens. I haven't wired it in yet. So my app component, my main component, my app. Yeah. new route to categories. Categories. What's going to happen when I save this? Boom, right? White screen of death. It's my little indicator that I've jacked something up, right? So why did it fail? Look at this page here and tell me why did this fail before I go to the console? What's that? I didn't import the component in, right? So I called for a component. This is kind of standard stuff, right? Call for a component, but then actually bring it in. So let's go ahead and bring it in. Import categories from categories, category container, which is what I called it. Okay, and there's my app back. Now, categories, right? Because that's the component that we created. And that's all that it basically does. Okay, so let's go back to the main, and we'll do a couple of things here. One is we're going to need to, again, here's some magic. We're going to import provider from React Redux. And we're going to, let's see, import store from app store. Oh my goodness, nice typing. Okay, I would expect this will break. No, it didn't break because App Store has, well, I guess it's doing nothing. Import Create store from Redux. Import. What I typically do, this is just my own style. Let's do import reducer from, where am I here? Reducer. Export default. Create store. Nope. Okay, that's our store. All right, said it was a pretty simple file. It pretty much imports, this creates the out of Redux, imports our reducer, and creates a store out of the reducer. If you go back to the REPL that I did earlier, that looks almost the same. If I do a new window and go back to the REPL, that's kind of a point of reference. Redux. That's this line here. Whoop. Let's store equal little Redux reducer. It's the same exact thing, right? We're just using the actual Redux instead of my Redux. Is that cool? Okay. We're still in good shape. As long as I've gotten that typed in correctly, we should be fine when I go to the main and I do the next step, which is, actually, let me pull up this so we can kind of go through our checklist, like kind of mentally. I'll keep a couple tabs open here, but if I go back to here, right? What I want to hit here though is that last slide. Super slow. So the cheat sheet, right? We're going to create the reducer and the actions. We're going to create a store that imports the reducer and returns create store, right? Which we've done. We've done this part, right? Did that. In the main, I've imported the store and created an instance, but I haven't done this yet, this wrap provider. I don't have a reducer yet. So my store is going to fail. I won't be able to do anything without a reducer. So let's go ahead and create the reducer real quick. And we'll just make it a little simple one. Just to have something there, and we'll go ahead and tweak it a little bit later to make more sense. So open the reducer up, and the reducer, guys remember how that looked?
Switch statement.
What's that?
The switch statement.
Yeah. And the reducer takes what?
Well, it takes next state. Action.
Takes the action, right?
It updates the state.
Updates the state, right? Take the state, which is going to be the initial state in the action. And we're going to say,
Wouldn't we need to make or add stuff into our action file for this to work?
what's that?
Wouldn't we need to have our action.js functional? For this
We
to work?
will, not yet. At this point, the reducer can live kind of on its own, right? So all it's going to do at this point is just kind of what we had on the replet, which we're going to say, let action and payload, type equal action, switch on type, case. We know we're going to have to do an add, right? Add category. And assuming that our state, let's do this actually before we do that. Default return state. Assuming our categories are just an array, what is add going to do? We've done this a bunch of times.
Add, just gonna put it into the end of the
Right. So what's a good way of doing that?
push.
Can't touch the state. State and
What you run.
the payload. Right. Now, this is a scary statement. Okay, because it doesn't make any assertions on what the payload is. Right. So for now, we'll leave it. Right. Maybe we come back to this and test this later on. This assumes payload is what you want to add to state. So payload had better be an object of the exact shape you're looking for. And it might not be a bad idea just to kind of note that in here. As good practice is kind of like, these are going to look like an ID, which is something. We'll do a create date of whatever. And what else? It'll have just call it a name. Call it a name? Call it a title. Let's call it a title. Well, it's just a category, right? So it really has nothing to it. Let's just leave it at that, right? An ID, some created date, and a title. We might add more stuff to it later on, but for now, that's probably good. And our store is going to work now. Our store has a reducer that will actually do something.
Can you go back over? That's a spread array, right? Spreader.
Yep, we're going to spread out the state
Okay.
and
So-
add something to the end of it and return that, the result of that.
So what that is saying that we're going to be returning two things into that array.
The current state plus the new thing. Right. It's like doing a push, but since you can't actually touch the state, we're going to spread the state out, add a thing to the end of that list, and then return that new list. Okay. And you can imagine we're going to do delete. We'll go through and filter for delete. For update, we'll go ahead and, we'll map through it and change out the thing. So the way that this is going to work should be pretty familiar to what you guys have done already for everything else you've done. We're just going to put that logic in here now instead of in the component itself. The component supposed to use this thing. Okay. So at this point, my main imports create store from app store and imports provider from React Redux. Now I got to wire it up. Now here's where, you could get bit and I may get bit. Let's keep an eye on if I get the white screen over here. So we're going to do this. We're going to say Oh, goodness. Provider store equals store. Let's see. Okay, so this has imported create store from the store and created an instance of it and created this provider wrapper. This provider wrapper now goes around browser router, which goes around app, and it all kind of ties together. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. Now I do have some white screen of death happening over here. Let's see what I did wrong. I may have done this wrong. Nope. Let's see here. I ran into this earlier today, and it took me a minute to troubleshoot through it. It is React Redux. Create store from App Store. Store equals create store. Do I need to do? Let me just double check the syntax on that. One thing that's kind of annoying that I'm sure you're starting to notice is that sometimes you do this and sometimes you do it with the curly braces. You guys notice that? Yeah?
Yeah, and sometimes you have to wrap in the curly braces, sometimes just text.
Right. So create store doesn't get wrapped there, but I think in here or in the app, I believe it does. Let's see, out there, where's my store file? Create store, reducer from reducer.
Isn't it a matter of whether or not it's the default export or you're importing?
I think that's what I might have done. Let me just pull this out and see if I'm going to take the one that works. Is that the one that works? No, I'm in the wrong area. It is. That's what it is. It's create store inside the braces. And there we are. That's pretty annoying. But it's a good place to look, right? So I'm hoping that as I go through this stuff, and I'm going to get bit by a few things as we go along here because you just type things wrong. Nonsense errors like what we just saw, that error gave me no indication that that's what the problem was, other than I couldn't find Redux, right? Or Redux store wasn't a thing. But again, a simple thing to check. That's why I went there. I wanted to see a previously working version to make sure I had the syntax right. And it basically was, I needed to put the braces around here to pull the object out of Redux instead of my name. So that's all it was. So now we have, if we're correct, right, we have a main, which pulls in our store, creates an instance of store, and it wraps the app not only in browser router, but in this provider. And it goes kind of in that hierarchy, okay? And what this does, it makes store available everywhere. This is what, remember when I drew the picture of it kind of being off in the cloud? Now I can get to the store in my components. Does that make sense? Okay, it shouldn't. You guys are all saying, yeah, it makes sense, but like there's no way the hell that makes sense, right? It's magic. This is Redux magic, right? We do this here, and now store is the thing. It wraps store around the application as kind of a global, and I can get into it, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and close the main.
We'll pretty much always have a provider.
Always. You need to, that's kind of the thing that gives you the store. But so, and again, at the very, very root level. So I think in my presentation, I noted that Let me go out and find that file for you real quick. I think we said, well, there, I noted it here in the root component, import the store, create the instance, and wrap with the provider. Okay. At the very, very, very highest level is where this happens. The same with the browser router, right? You can do browser routing inside of your elements too if you want to have separate routing inside. But generally speaking, when you've got application-wide routing to do, like we do here, and application-wide storage to do, as we do here, you put that way at the top, and it trickles everything down, so everything can touch it. Cool? All right. I'm going to close the main down because it's now no longer interesting. We've got it set. We've got our store, which is working, and we know that it's okay. I'm going to close that file down. If I need to reference it again, I'll reopen it. I'm not going to open up. Well, I guess I have to do it. Let's do our actions real quick, just so we have one action in there that does the add. And what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to set up the create action, and I'm going to import UUID from UUID v4 because we said in our store or in the reducer that we're going to have some ID, so we got to create an ID. And let's just do export const. Let's just call the first action, let's just call it create or category create. And that's going to be a function that takes a category. And yep, thank you. Yes, they do. Crazy that way. And we're going to set some defaults. So say category.id equals UUID. Category dot, what did I call it? Start date or create date? Create date. New date, right? And then we're going to return. So what we're assuming here, we're going to get a category in. Okay, you're assuming with this one, whoops, whoever calls this is going to send you something like category is foo, something along those lines, what you're going to get. Okay, now I named it, we haven't named it yet, so we can call it whatever we want to, or I'm calling it title, I guess. Let's call it title, what it actually is. You're going to get something like that. So if you're going to get this sent to you, the create action is going to give you the title and the create date for free, and then we're going to go ahead and post this up to the state. Does that make sense? So let's go back to the REPL, and I think it's a good point of reference for us. So you remember here when we were dispatching the action? Okay, so I have an action. It's got a name. Right? Every action is ultimately it's an object that has a type and a payload. That's what an action basically is. Okay. In this case, I created a dictionary of actions. I made an actions object that has them by key. So the key of ink returns this thing. What you ultimately care about is this. Every action is just this object that has a type and some payload. Okay. So in our action, right, our first action, I made it a function instead of an object, but as long as it returns that object, we're fine, right? So if I did something like return that, right, some type and some payload, right? So our type is going to be, what did we say our type was? What the reducer called it, add category, right? So if I call this add category, my payload is the category. Okay, are you tracking what's going to happen here? When this action gets fired, when I dispatch this action to the reducer is going to say, ooh, add category, and here's some payload. This payload is going to be the whole thing, right? This payload is going to have an ID, a create date, and a title, we hope. Okay, so when I call the reducer with this action, when it gets dispatched, it's going to go, ooh, your type is add category. I'm going to add that payload, whatever this payload was, to the state. And that payload is going to be a full object. It's going to have an ID, a create date, and a title. Does that make sense? What's that?
No.
Are you guys all good over there too? Tracking through? Back to the action? Sure. So we're going to wire the action up here in a second, okay? But so you know, yeah, they aren't wired. I have to create the file because if I don't create the file, then I can't create the component. It'll start dying without it, right? But the way that these actions will connect, this action, when dispatched to the reducer, will give it a type of add category and the payload of whatever the category is. And the category is going to be an object with an ID, a create date, and a title that we assume is going to be sent in by whatever component we create that has the category logic. Cool? All right, so my container now needs to have some work done to it because it doesn't know any of this. It's got no connections at all. So what I want to do first is let's connect those subcomponents to it. So we'll do an import category form from category form and import category list from category list. And instead of it saying categories, because remember, this is a container component, right? What's my rule about the container components? And what can't a container do?
Well, manages.
It manages, which means it doesn't render anything, right? So now again, it's React. You can do rendering wherever the hell you want. Best practice, not do it in a container component. Container component should be considered to be a controller. So I'm just going to go category, form and list. And I gotta do this because it's React. Divitis. It's going to render a div around those things, so it has to contain. Remember the JSX rule? It's got to be at least one thing that's a container, which kind of crappy. But guess what's coming in React, the next version? Thanks to my friend who works there. I was telling you about this. So I had a buddy who got hired at Facebook on the React team, and he's like wicked senior guy, super, super smartest guy I've ever met. His job title on the React team is to make it awesome. That's like his whole job description. There's like no bullet points of all this crazy shit. It's like, yeah, just make it awesome, right? He's a developer in the trenches for years like us, and this is what he's proposed to do.
You the guy that made things spin 360?
Yes, same guy.
Same guy.
Yeah. You see that? That's Benjamin's idea. Okay? Because React makes you wrap things in something, right? But what I had before, I'm going to get this extra div on my page, which I just don't want to have to style around an extra div, right? When I'm doing CSS work, I want clean markup. I don't want to have divs around every damn thing. We don't need to. No. This is purely for containing things like this.
Why can't you just get rid of that?
What's that?
Why can't you just get rid of that?
Well, the way that JSX works, it works in this hierarchy, so you have to have the wrapper. But in this way, this will render nothing. So it'll only render what these are. So you don't get that extra stupid div in your page. That's some genius stuff right there, right? But until then, we're stuck with doing this. So what I'm going to expect happens now, again, as we kind of keep rolling, is that now when I'm on the categories page, I get my two components rendered out. Okay, so as you can see, the way that I'm developing this, I'm kind of adding like piecemeal here to make sure that as I do things, I don't screw it up and have to go track my steps, right? When you're doing these large connections like this, tying a whole bunch of crap together, it's really hard if you try and big bang the thing and you know what big banging is in coding? All of it, right? So one thing, and just a complete sidetrack, as far as big bang check-ins go, we saw that some of the teams in your projects had hundreds of check-ins, right? One team, I think the players in the team averaged 50-something check-ins each. Other teams averaged 8 check-ins each, okay? When you have larger time between your check-ins and more code between them, way more chance for failure, okay? So here, I'm doing everything, make a small state, make a small reducer, make a small single action. Am I still working? Add a component. connect the components. Am I still working? And I'm making sure that as I get through all this connective tissue, that I haven't broken the app yet. So when I get down to when I actually want to do some work and make like this thing actually save something, then I'm going to be in a position where I can. Good?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go back to the main real quick and do something because I forgot. Let's go to main. Is this the right main? I had two folders open at once, so I want to make sure I'm in the right spot. So we're going to go in here and do a component did mount. And I mentioned this earlier. Do you guys remember what I said I wanted to do here?
Subscribe to the state.
I want to subscribe to my state, right? So store.subscribe. And I'm just going to make a little function that does a console log of store.get state. Cool. That way we should get this kind of build up down here. As things are actually happening in state, we should start seeing changes down here at the bottom. Okay. Remember, a component did mount won't run the first time. That's why I'm not seeing anything. Only when it updates, right? In the first render, it won't. This lifecycle event does not file.
What's between that and component did update then?
This happens right before render. Component did update, I think, happens. There's something that happens in between those two. I forget the exact order. Will mount is before the state changes. Okay. Did mount is after. Yeah. Did mount happens right before. Sorry, will mount after state change. Did mount right before render.
So did mount is before.
Before the render. It's like the last thing happens before the render. All right, let's close that down for just why I do that. I like to see my tabs and know what's going on up here. So if I have too many things open, then they start squishing. I'm going to open up the category form just to have it. And the app, I think I can close now. The app has done its job. So yeah, so now the category text. Let's go ahead and get this thing wired up. So we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to pull in connect. So we're going to import connect from React Redux. And this is going to be where it gets squirrely for you guys. So connect is it's going to give us a method that's going to say, let's do this now. We're going to say const map state to props. That's going to take state. It's going to return an object. Let's just call it categories state. And const map that takes state and I'm sorry, action and get state. And here, we're going to map our actions to method names with keys and values. Okay, so this is where we start applying some English words to things. So I'm going to use the same words for both ends of this equation because I chose a really good word the first time, which is category create. It's going to be dispatch. My error dispatch define. Action get state. blah. Let me make sure I've got that syntax right, because this gets confusing. So hold on one sec. Dispatch get state, category add, yeah, dispatch. Okay, here's the magic. Okay. So what's happening here is we're mapping our state to this new word called categories. I can call it whatever I want to, doesn't matter. And I'm mapping our dispatches. So you remember how we talked about, I was saying earlier, like in our REPL, let me pull it up again. In the REPL, I'm calling store.dispatch.actions and whatever. That's kind of hard to manage. What this does, this gives me the ability now inside of a component. I'm just going to do that here. This dot props, actually, I'll just do it. Category form, categories equal this dot props dot categories. Okay, so I can send, actually, I want to do that down here. So I'm sending state down to my child component through this property called categories that I created outside of the component. Okay, it's a little bit noodle bakey right there, right? But what's happening is down here I'm mapping dispatches and I'm mapping state. Okay, map state to props is just it returns a function, and Redux runs this function. It takes the state and it returns some key value pair, some object. Right? I could have called it state is state, and I could have said state equals this. I'm choosing an English word here because it makes more sense to me as I'm coding the project, right? So basically, because of this, in my component, I now have properties, a prop called categories for free. And it's the state that comes out of the Redux store. Okay, so all of that magic that we did earlier, that mapping of the, where's my my app? I should not have closed it. Not the app, the main. This bit of magic here, this provider store equals store, makes that globally available to me so that in here, this works. Without that, this doesn't work, right? It's crazy how that connection works. And Connect is what does that. Connect kind of makes all this stuff tie together. Okay, this is one of those things where you got to take with a grain of salt that it's going to work for right now. Okay, these two methods get run by Redux right when the app fires. It will take whatever's in your state and map it to a property with a named value or named key. I chose categories, so now I have this.props.categories is my state. I could have done state. It's assumed that I had some more complicated state. Something like that, or state, dot foobar, right? I can map categories to any piece of my state if I wanted to, okay? And I can pass that down through the system, okay? Choosing at this point to wrap the entire state in that one key, okay? And the same thing with my properties, with my dispatches, okay? So now when I run in these subcomponents, right? When I say category form, handle add category equals this dot props dot what? Category create. Because again, I mapped this dispatcher to the properties. So when this runs, this component gets fed properties. And the properties are going to be named categories is a property, category create is a property. Categories is the state. Category create is a method that takes a category and runs a dispatch on it. Okay?
You run those two things on every component you have?
No, you don't have to. So once I've run it here on the container, remember I said the container component's job is to kind of manage all this crap, right? So the container component does the connect. It pulls everything in.
The children you're
It's got to pull the actions in too. This is one piece I forgot here. It's got to pull the actions in. And its job is to kind of manage this. And I can pass. So before where I would say, I'm going to just pseudocode this out, or I'll just code it out. Constructor props this dot whatever handle add. Remember all this boilerplate we used to do, right? Handle add blah, all that shit, right? And then you would say handle add category was this handle add, right? That's a way of doing it. What I just showed you was the new way of doing it. So if I put this on here twice, this dot props dot category create, right? Those are equivalent statements, okay? They're equivalent only because I physically added a thing here to do handle add, right? Otherwise, this is saying just delegate it down to this dispatcher in the reducer. I'm completely bypassing. I don't have to do this anymore unless I wanted to do something special. Like I could have left this here and leave it like this, and in here I can, when this comes back, I can do some work, and then call this dot props dot category create with some category, right? So I could still keep the old way of doing it, do some pre-func, and then send it into the creator, right? Or I could just delegate it right down and let this guy just call the creator directly, okay? And again, as the author, you have to kind of know what your plan is, right? Do I want to let this subcomponent manage that, or I want him just to give it back to me? So here, I'm saying give it back to me. I'll deal with all the validation stuff and send it on its way. Here, I'm saying you can do it, and I'll just trust you. But this down here, at the end of the day, this dot props dot category create is what gets called, and that actually goes to the reducer. So this dot props dot category create calls this and runs this action, right? It dispatches this action to our reducer. Okay, so what do I have in here for actions? I got just category create. I need to pull that in. Okay. And this will, now that I'm pulling this in, I'm doing the same thing twice. So let's leave it like, we'll leave it like that for now. We'll try it both ways and just see what happens. We'll wire the component up, the add component, both, so that both ways can work. Okay. Let's take a break. Back in 10 minutes, 8:45. I feel like my recording didn't shit itself that time, so. It didn't. It went the whole time. So for whatever reason, it worked.
It's gonna go on principle. It's gonna go on principle. It's free. I know. But I mean, it's
Yeah, no. You go with other people who like think a lot about like math.
no one I know would want to go to this. Other than maybe, actually, maybe the one I can't think of anyone that would want to go with me.
Yeah, but
It's okay. I mean, I'm not saying that you have to go with me. I'm just saying.
Maya would probably go with it.
That's true.
Maya would go with love stuff like that.
I love loud shit.
Y'all were in good spot. We just take the toolkit and start with that. That's what I didn't do.
Yep.
I need a toolkit. I need the wrong toolkit. Whatever I use, I probably don't get too much stuff in there.
Get out of here. We did more after last Saturday than after like last month. Like more events on to 2-year-old birthday on Sunday. It was pretty fun. Oh, nice. I love kid birthdays. A lot of cookies, a lot of cake. Good fun. I just feel like I'm gonna get sick though. Not to kids. Like my girlfriend's like niece and nephew, like they're always all, which is great. I love playing with them, but it's like they always have a cold and always.
What happened
It is what it is, and it just makes you stronger. At one point, 2-year-old June was just like spitting on me. I'm like, yeah. Like, hanging on, like, biting me, drilling on me, wrestling the other one.
Hey, you got you're fine now.
It's like, I see like they're thinking like, great, well, have some orange juice tomorrow morning, go for the best.
How's your son enjoying the college life so far?
He's put on some weight. I can tell you that.
Freshman 15.
Yep. No, you know what? It's funny. I joke with him all the time. He's a gym rat, so he's putting on good weight for the most part. Like up here, it's good weight, and down here, not so much. And I'm like, okay, so you're getting your protein from your beer,
That's more power.
right? So I mean, you got to like run that off. You can lift and drink protein powder, but you got to run that gut off a little bit. But he loves it. You know, he went to a really small private school. Like his graduating class was like 70.
Oh, wow.
So his college is 2,000 people total, which to us is like, you know, rinky dink. To him, it's like, you know, huge.
Definitely.
So it was if he would have went to Wazoo from that little school or something, he would have been like, I think, and lost. But he couldn't have played there. That's the only problem. He would have. He actually, that was his number one choice. He didn't like UW at all. He visited both campuses and he's like, just yeah.
He's fucking with me.
Yeah, he's fucking.
He's fucking with me.
Yeah. No, he liked UW's got better baseball facilities, but the campus, he just didn't like the campus.
Really?
He's like, it's too much. It's too, not spread out was the wrong word. He said it's too city-like. He just didn't feel like it was like home, where Wazoo felt more like a home, but it was 8 hours away. I'm like, really?
Nothing outside.
No, there's nothing.
There's nothing in Wazoo. That's why it's party central.
Yeah. Not much else to do.
Yeah.
Pullman.
You definitely new baseball stadium is sick.
It's awesome. He's played there a couple of times.
70 graduating.
The coach is a good
class.
guy.
Wow.
The coach's son.
Oh, really?
Ball for like 2 years. Our quarterback.
That's cool.
He was good.
Megs?
Yeah. He's probably our best passing quarterback we ever had.
That's cool.
Which isn't saying much, but he was.
I couldn't even imagine a class only 70. 'Cause
It's
my
good and bad.
graduating class was like 970.
Jeez.
And that was like the people that graduated. So, I mean, I went to
Wow.
see kids at.
Wow. Mine was 400, and I thought it was pretty big. But yeah, for 70 is cool because like you know everybody. like they all went to school from like kindergarten, kind of went through the thing together. Like most of them, kind of like about a third of that class has been together since kindergarten. So it's cool, but there's no hiding.
But you also know everybody.
You know everybody. There's no secrets. Every teacher knows everybody. There's no BSing with that kind of a deal. So
Acting up in class.
hell no, you can't hide.
And then about to call your mom.
Yeah.
My friend who went to, until high school, was in a single room schoolhouse. 16 people.
Wow.
Between, K through, 8? Yeah.
Wow.
A place called Yak, the Yak in Montana. It's the most, we're called Yak in Montana, the middle of
Jeez.
What is that, Riley?
That's awesome.
Mr. Montana resident.
high school. And then he went to the, state big city of Troy, right? So he won state football. That's the state championship out.
I couldn't even imagine something that small.
Yeah,
Yeah, my high school I went to Atlanta.
Oh, I don't know.
We won state like we called it Killer Girl.
I can see that.
That's sick.
They're like one of them big down there. I was in what?
Population is
Challenging each other to see who can take the hardest hit.
Yeah.
I mean, like Libby is big town.
Libby.
Big town.
Yeah,
That's like
got a
the
lot of
biggest
friends from
fear.
Detroit area.
Coming from middle school to high school, one of my buddies, he was in football. Like, man,
That's crazy.
don't get you.
That's super small.
Oh, that's right in Canada.
You got the seniors and juniors big as hell compared to you just coming in.
It's international.
I didn't weigh anything until I drew a name. I was 146 when I
Yeah.
drew the name.
It's just like how I was worried that like how much of a crazy culture shock is it for those place like you grew up in a place that's a population of 200 and then all of a sudden if you
Barely
thrown into any kind of regular city it's just like
Oh, it never stopped recording. That's awesome.
like
So caught our entire conversation. We have to. So remember, at minute 55, I got to screen that stuff out. Cool. All right. Awesome sauce. All right, let's get rolling again. We'll finish strong here. So I did make one mistake earlier, and I want to make sure I point that out in my map dispatch to props. It takes a dispatch, not an action, and then it runs dispatch of whatever action you're asking for with the payload. That's how that works. So this actually dispatches this method, category create with category. Go to the actions, category create takes a category.
Yes, Lord, more time.
Sure. Okay, so when I match dispatch to props, remember, we're going to dispatch an action to a reducer. That's kind of the sentence that we're going to follow here, right? So forget that this does properties. Look at what's going to happen when this is called, okay? So when somebody calls this.props.category, that category create, it's going to run into here. This method is going to take a category as a parameter, and it's going to run dispatch on it, okay? Remember that dispatch is a special method we get out of Redux. And it's going to call this action, category create, with this category that we got sent here. So these categories are the same, right? We take a parameter, and we send that same parameter in to the dispatcher, right? This dispatches this action. So we're saying dispatch the action, category create category. And that is found here. Category create takes category, and it returns an object. Okay. What we could have done, and I can't do that, but I'll paste it in. These two would have been the same. Dispatch, type, add category. Those two lines do the exact same thing. Oops. Do we understand why that is?
That's what's in the other file. No.
Okay. Okay. These are these. Now again, I'm getting an error here because these are the same key twice, right?
Yeah.
But if I expand this up a little bit, okay. So this is making an object, right? So our match dispatch to props, right? Returns an object with the key of some method name. Okay, category create. We're creating a method. And this category create takes as its first argument a category, and it returns a dispatch, right? We're going to dispatch, and we're going to dispatch with an action. Remember, we dispatch an action to the reducer. In this first case, we're dispatching this action, which is this method that I pulled in from the actions file. So category create category is one of our actions in this file. Okay, it's category create, and it takes category as a parameter. It returns back an object that has a type and a payload. That's what it returns to us. Okay, in here, I could have just bypassed that completely. So I don't want to do. I'll define my own action, my own payload right now. And here I'm saying dispatch this object with type of add category and payload of this category that I got.
So you don't even have to touch action.
I wouldn't even, this is completely optional. Actions is a totally optional thing, right? But it saves you from having to do this kind of crap, right? And then also, if I wanted to, like in our current action, I'm doing some work, right? So you notice that I had to do this defaulting the ID and the defaulting the date ahead of time. Here, it's really hard to do that. That makes this thing some giant, it's impossible to read. So this is like a little bit of syntactic sugar for you, right? So we basically say dispatch and run this method. Okay, I could have done, I have all sorts of nasty stuff at the end, don't I? I could have done category, let's just do it. Category delete. Category, did I spell it wrong? Dispatch categories dot delete or del. Okay, and that's horribly named. But let's say that in here I exported categories del type delete category payload category. Something like that, right? You could have returned a naked object out of here. And it's the same thing, right? We're doing these methods because it gives you a chance to do some work, some validation work ahead of time before you send it into the reducer. Okay, because remember, the reducer can't do anything. Its job is to take what you give it and do something, right? So we're using our actions file as kind of a way to sort of be able to do some pre-work. Now, most of our actions won't do any pre-work. Like the delete action is going to be super simple, right? Our delete action is just going to go filter and return and you're done, right? What's that?
The payload is referring to, is that just a part of your state, that category?
It's whatever you're sending to the reducer, right? So this could, remember I said earlier, it's like a hint to what the reducer should do. So in this case, the reducer is going to take this payload of the category, and the category is going to look like, it'll actually be the full thing. It'll be ID, create date, and title, right? So our reducer is going to take that category, wherever it is, right here, this payload, is going to be it's going to be one of these,
Gotcha.
right? Now delete, just write it out there, right? If I do case delete, help me write this, delete category, right? That's going to return what?
State, state filter, or just
Well, you can just do state.filter,
it'll
right? Yeah.
a new thing.
Yeah, return state.filter, and what it's going to take? It's going to take the state or what's going to take? It's going to take an item or a category, right? I got to do it right. Category and an iterator. And it's going to return what?
Category
ID not equal to payload, right? In this case, payload might be might be the ID, or it could be payload.id. We don't know how we're going to do this yet. We can leave it like this for now, right? If it's that, if it's not equal to it, let's say if it's equal to it. Then we'll return, let's see. It's not equal to it. And we'll return the category. Right? Otherwise, return null. That's delete, right? Basically, you're filtering out either give me the thing that doesn't match me, right? If it's not the one I want to delete, give it back. Otherwise, give me nothing. Okay, that's essentially what delete's going to be. We're not touching the actual state. We're just, returning back a smaller version of it. Okay, but the original state is fine. It's still the same thing. But Redux is going to take this, and it will manage the state for you and give you back the actual properly defined state. Cool? So these are purely shorthand. Syntactic sugar, shorthand, lets us get through our day. Cool? Now, I haven't yet done actually I should get rid of that damn thing because it's confusing.
So wires get wired up with the map dispatch to props. That's what wires.
Yeah, and this connect does it, right? See, first you create, what do I want to map to my properties? I want to map state via the key name categories. I want to map this dispatcher, right? This dispatch of this create category action. I'm going to map it to a thing called category create. Those both go to properties. This line down here, this connect, connects it all up. This makes it happen so that when this categories component is created, right, when React does a new categories, right, these things get shoved into the properties for you. So you have access to them. And that's where I get this.props.categories or this.props. Like I said, I'm doing it up there actually. This.props.category create. That's how I have access to it. And again, this is like 7 lines of code that's really confusing. It's one of those things you got to trust that it just works, right? These connections get made for you by Redux when you declare it this way. Redux and React are very declarative. So you're saying what things are, and then things will just happen as they go. Yeah, Riley, you have a question?
So our payload, will it always be an object, or are they going to be like functions that we can call?
Could be anything. Your payload could be a method, it could be a string, could be an object, whatever you need it to be, right? The action is really, like I said, it's giving the reducer the hint of what to do.
So it's almost like a map, basically, but it's just an instruction.
It's an instruction, but it's not. I mean, you wouldn't typically send a function in as an action, as a payload. Your payload's going to be data. It's going to be like the ID of the thing that you want to change, or it's going to be the thing you want to add, or the piece of the state that you want to change, right? Typically, it's going to be, hey, reducer, take your state, and here's a hint of what to do with it. The reducer can do it however it needs to do it.
And that's just, it makes it easier to target one thing specifically.
Exactly. And this makes it way easier to, right? Because otherwise, up in here, you're doing, you have to write this whole thing out. Dispatch, right? So instead of saying this.props.category create data, I could have done this.dispatch data. Again, those lines are the same. Actually, it would have to be store.dispatch category, blah, blah, blah. Those lines are the same. Because remember, the provider gave you the store, so you can do this, right? But this is just nasty, right, and unmanaged. This is clean, and Redux manages it for you. So behind the scenes, all the wiring that has to happen is taken care of. It's just one of those things where libraries like React and Redux, they kind of help you through your day. Once you kind of get past what the hell is going on here, and you realize that this is just moving data around for me and I don't have to think about it, then you go, okay, just take a big breath and let's just run, right? All right, let's make a category. So what I've got here is we wired up our category form, and this is the controller. So remember, it renders nothing but the div. We're going to show category form. We're sending a handler to it. And the handler is going to be this handle add. Okay. The assumption here is that this category form is going to add a category for us, and I'm giving it the handler right here, handle add. I'm expecting to get back some data, probably better worded as a category. category. Told you. And we're going to call this.props.category create with that category that comes back to me. Okay. And again, that's right here. We're going to run category create with that category. It's going to run dispatch and create the category. That's what's going to happen when we submit this form. All that wiring happens behind the scenes. The reason why I'm doing this as a separate thing, I'm having a handler of this handle add. Okay, later on, when we do the form, let's clear this out here. Our form right now is going to be used for two purposes. We may not get to both of them tonight because we're kind of running short again. It seems like this can take a while. But let's just go ahead and do this. So if we have a component, right, all it's going to do is give me the input and a button, and that's it. That's the form's entire job, is to give me the input and the button. And then it's going to, on change, update its own state. On submit, it's going to run the handler. Right? That's what we've been doing this the whole time. What's different about this today, and this is kind of what we should have been doing, with the last exercise, right? This is the way it should be wired, is on the main screen, which is what we have here in the main component, calling the category form. The assumption is I want to add a category. This is going to draw a form at the very top of the screen. Add a new category. In that instance, right, when I add, the handler is going to be add cat, whatever that thing was called. Later, when I'm listing the categories out and I double click the category to get the little form like we did for the last assignment, right? It's the same form. Why should I write the form two times? I'm going to call the same exact form, but this time I'm going to say update with a different handler, right? And the handler is going to be update cat. So I can use the same form for two purposes. That's why I'm using the word handler here. Instead of handle add and handle update as two separate properties, I'm going to send one property in, handler. And always the handler will either point to handle add, or at some point it's going to point to handle update. Make sense? So when I first do this time here, I'm saying handler is the add. Later, when we do the list and I do the double click thing, I'm going to point to a different handler. And we use the same form for two purposes. So let's just go ahead and wire the form up real quick. I've got the add handler. I'm calling the form, and I'm sending it no data. Okay. My category form, pretty much unchanged. I just added the constructor to save typing time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set state on this form. Okay, so, and again, all the form is really going to do at this point is manage the title, right? So we're going to do something a little bit different. Maybe you guys did this for your projects or for the last assignment. Let's say this.state, and I'm going to say it's going to be this.props.category or an object that just has title in it. Okay, does that line make sense? Okay, so I'm thinking ahead here to when we do use this form to update a record. In that case, I'm going to call the form and I'm going to send it the properties, right? I'm going to send it the category as a property. And when that happens, I'm going to actually wire this form up to show me the category with its properties. Otherwise, I'm going to use it for a new form. So let's go ahead and change it here. We'll say, I'm going to get rid of this div, make it a form. On submit. Equal this handle submit, which means handle submit. It's almost like your finger's going to type this stuff with your eyes closed, right? Handle submit e dot prevent default. And what's in the form? Input. Let's do name equals title. Value equals this dot state dot category. So if we have it sent in, it'll print it in there. Cool. Yeah, this dot category, and then we say what else? We want to say on change. Actually, let's do the visual stuff first. Placeholder equals new category name. Yeah. Don't be commas, it's not an object. And finally, on change equal handle change. Okay. We'll say this dot set state e dot target dot name is e dot target dot value, which should look super familiar, right? So when this input field changes, we'll set our state. And when we submit the form, we're going to prevent default. And we're going to call this dot handler, right? Is that what it is? This dot props dot handler with cool. Does that all make sense, what I've gotten in there? Right? So when the input changes, we set our state. When the form is submitted, we're going to prevent default in the form so we don't get a refresh. We're going to call the handler. And we're going to assign an empty object we're just going to copy state into an empty object. A reference, not a reference to state, but a new state. Just an object. Okay. So when this form is rendered the first time, on the top of the page, it should be an empty form, and the state should be title of nothing. Correct? If I come back here to edit one, my state's going to actually be the whole thing, this props category, which is the full ID, date, and the title, right? In that case, right, I would expect that this value would get populated by this dot state dot whatever the thing was. Okay?
Can you go to container real quick?
Sure.
So if this dot prop that category gets passed in, where is that?
It's not being passed in. Because remember, right here, we're in add mode. When I do it this way, I don't have, so what's going to happen is that's going to fail, right? This dot props dot category is not going to be a thing. So my state's going to be this, plain old title guy. Okay, so I should.
Oh, is that for later?
That's for later.
Okay.
I'm trying to think ahead here as a developer. I know I'm going to have to update this thing at some point. So this is how we're going to do it. So for right now, what I've got is what I would expect, which is just a form field and nothing. What's going to happen, what should happen is when I enter this category, we should get our handler to run. The handler should, right, run the category create with the category. And really what ought to happen at the end, we won't see it yet, but my main, the subscribe should fire, right? We should see a state pop up on our console. If all that wiring, I'll leave this file open so we can kind of track through and make sure we're working. Let's reload here. Get my console and say first category. Okay. Oh, something was spitting a bunch of stuff out, wasn't it? That's awesome. But look at that. My store now has first category with an ID and a create date. Okay. So do you want to look at how the data went through on that? How all that happened? Because a lot happened there, right? Why is it printing out my handler every single time? Somewhere I've got a console log. Oh, there it is. That's kind of nasty. Let's do it again where it's clean. Okay, so this is a new category, right? My store this is a new category. So the way that happens, let's kind of track through all of it. We'll end with main. So category container called the form, and it sent into the form one property, which is how to handle the add case. Okay, handle add wants a category back, so it expects a full object back, and it's going to call this.props.category create with that object. This.props.category create was given to us by mapping the dispatcher to properties. Okay, in my actions file, there's an action called category create, which is a function that takes a category and it returns an object that has a type and a payload. That payload is going to be the category that was sent to it, right? And an ID and a create date. So it's going to get title. We're going to add ID and create date to it. And that's what this action returns, that object. This right here is going to be an object that's going to say ID is XXX, date or create date is, come on, whatever. And title equals whatever. That's what this is going to be. This category will be that. We understand how that got there?
Yeah, can you change the names so that they're consistent with the things they need to be consistent with?
Sure. What do you want me to change?
I mean, category create and category select that this,
That one's just a variable, that's what you call it later on, right? Is that what you're getting at? And the one on the right? has to
yeah,
be-
so just going through and making it so that, like, make the one on the left, category create crop.
Yeah.
And
Like
then rename things so that, yeah. Okay.
Because the other category create has to match the actions.
Yeah, so that's category.
Yeah, this
create.
actually is a method in the actions file.
Yeah.
Right? I named them the same because they're doing the same thing. But I see what you're saying, right? So this one here is actually this.
Yeah, okay.
Is that less confusing when you see it that way?
I just wanted to make sure I was
Sure. No,
following
you're
all of
100%.
them, yeah.
100% right. So those two are the same. Right?
And then the other one, you're actually getting,
I'm-
are you importing that from?
I'm
your-
running this method because it's coming from your import category create
Yeah,
from the
okay.
actions file. So this is actually a thing. It's a real live thing in that actions file.
Uh-huh.
And that's how this gets to be run.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm dispatching whatever the result of this is. Remember, you dispatch an action, and an action is an object that has a type and a payload. Right. So this method in the actions file returns me, it all does return an object. Doesn't do any work. There's no methods in there, it just returns an object. Okay, so that stitching tracking?
Yeah, why are you sending that get state? The map, the dispatch.
Oh, it's what it expects. We're not actually doing anything with it. If we wanted to do a get state, we would have access to it with that.
Okay.
So it's just the way that it gets called. Okay, so when I change the category, handle add called this method right here, and it sent it the category that we created in the form, which went to the dispatcher. And the dispatcher said, oh, okay, that's going to become this object that I just drew out for you. Let's run the reducer with that and see what happens. And the reducer says, ooh, you wanted me to add a category. Okay, well, I'm going to give you back the old state plus whatever you gave me and shove it on top. Okay, Redux handles the rest. It takes the state, it does the update, it triggers the reloads, and your form, if I had a category list here, it would show. Okay, let's just do that real
So
quick.
in all
Yeah.
of that, I think I'm following, we're basically taking state and passing it down to a component and then lifting it back up
Mhm.
with those two maps. I don't understand what the provider and the create store are doing.
It's so the create store in the main, you mean? Way back over here? Okay. So the create store, this is what wires up the Redux engine. Okay, so create store, we created a store. So if I look at the store file again, let's pull it out. All the store file does is it pulls out the create store method from Redux. Okay. Takes our reducer and it creates a new store, a new Redux store with that reducer. Effectively, it's saying, hey, Redux, here's how I want you to operate everything. Now, it's in a separate file just for cleanliness sake. I could have put all this in the main and it wouldn't have mattered. But what it's doing, it's saying, hey, Redux, here's the reducer I want you to create a store with. Now, you can't create two stores, but you could have two stores. You could have two separate Redux apps in the same system, one using one store, one using a different store, and kind of render them separately. So you could have multiple stores, just not in the same running app. And that's what the main is doing here. The main just says, go ahead and get that create store method and make one. And that's the instance of store that we're going to use for this application. The provider.
But if you just call reducers directly instead of calling them.
But you won't, yeah. So without this bit here, this create store method from Redux, they won't work. Because Redux manages the store. If you recall the, where's the REPL that I had? Because Redux is managing the store itself, right? Your dispatchers won't actually touch the instance. That's why you've got to wire it up with a new store. And you bring in the reducer, and then it knows how to internally take that reducer and manage state with it. Like I said, it's doing a lot more than what my little demo did here. But that's why you've got to create a new instance of it. It wires up. Without that, you don't get the benefit of the connection on here, right? This connect method also takes that store that we created and it wires that store into these guys here. So the connect method is what basically reads this store here. So when you have the provider, it essentially puts out in the globals, and your connector can read that and do all the stitching for you. That's where the magic happens. That's why I say you got to trust that some of this stuff just works. And methods like these that you never actually call yourself, that actually live, and they live, you notice, outside of your class. They're just run when the file is loaded, they get run. They don't run every time your class is instantiated. They get run when the file's loaded. And so that's why I see you have one store. Redux kind of reads the one store and it goes. So some of these things you kind of have to accept that that's what's going on behind the scenes. So back to the app itself. Is everybody 100% clear on what happened when I added the category? It's really important that we understand that when I added the category, it called this, right? We sent this handler down to the form like we always do. When it comes back up, we're calling this category create prop. I spelled it wrong, I guess, right? Category create property, right? Yeah, now I'm right. It calls that, which dispatches that category create action, and magic happens in the backside. Okay, so let's go ahead and wire up the list. Now, taking the liberty in our earlier conversation of saying, well, what if we had this, right? We already said categories are your state, right? So my category list, let's just send the categories to it. So categories is this.props.categories. What's going to be weird in the category list component, it's going to have the same name for the property, unfortunately. But whatever. Don't be confused by that. So in here, the category list, let's just make it a UL for now. No. Let's go UL. We'll take the easy way out and we'll say this dot props dot categories. Yeah, categories. This dot props dot categories dot map category and I running out of room. And we'll just make it a simple list item that shows it. li key. I'm going to indent a lot. We get these multiple parameters just to make it easier to read. You guys know that in HTML it doesn't matter, right? You can indent and have new lines all you want to. The white space is ignored. So we'll do key equals category.id. And category title. Okay. So assuming that we've got things wired correctly still, this category list will take the list of categories from state and just start printing them out. So as I type these in, they should just start showing up on screen. Right, so we got the category list to show. And again, we did that by passing everything down. Does that make sense how that happened? I'm gonna break your brains here in a second. So make sure we understand. I'm gonna hide the reducer and the actions just to get room. And the app we don't need. So this .props.categories came from not directly here. This .props.categories for this component came from here. And I sent it down as categories. I could have said, it's probably better done as this way, cats, for clarity's sake. And here, cats. Better naming for the win, right? Blah, 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 right? So does that make sense? The properties here were sent to it from that parent component. Now what I can do is not do that at all. Okay, and here's where Redux, you'll see a little bit of benefit. It's going to be, actually I'm lying. It'll be of no benefit to this application, but it's beneficial for you to see how this works, right? This is pretty cool. So if I take a little bit of copy and paste out of here, and I'm going to go ahead and take the connector, import, this is such overkill from React, Redux, and I'm going to copy all this same crap out of here, right? Whoops. I don't need that at all. Okay. Right. That's some pretty cool stuff right there. So what happened was now I'm calling category list just by itself. I didn't send any properties to it. The category list on its own connected to the Redux store, map states to properties. I gave it some, BS name, and I can iterate over that BS name. It's reading from the same state. So this component independently connected to the global store, and I can actually, if I wanted to map the dispatchers in here as well, I could do that and give this form its own ability to maintain and manage the state with those methods. Okay, so again, two wild and crazy ways to do the same thing. One way kind of mimics what we've done before, which is passing stuff all the way down and rotating it up back. This way says my subcomponent can just connect to the same way my controller did. Now, is that smart for this app? Probably not, right? It's cool that you can do it, but in this app, it's small enough, and the category container probably should maintain and manage all the business logic, right? As such as it is, business logic for the front end. Not hand that down to the children. I like the children communicating back up their properties and using the parent methods. However, if there was a need for a category form, let's say, which there could be a need for this form, and there may be, we may actually wire it up this way. Instead of delegating back up the chain, let the category form itself just talk to those dispatch methods, right? If I connected this thing to the dispatch, I could have the container have none of these methods. I could just get rid of all this stuff completely. Let the form do it all, right? Design decisions, right? If you're going to have the container truly be a container and a controller, wire it up the way we have it here, right? And just delegate things down. If you view the components, and maybe they need to be independent animals that can manage their own state and understand some of the business rules, then let them do the connection to the store themselves and manage it that way.
So this all goes, right now we have it, everything goes back to the container touches the store.
Exactly. Right now, well, actually,
Well, it's
it did a second ago until I did all this junk in here, right?
In this right here, when you're getting on line 29, you're getting state, you're getting the entire state back.
Yeah.
So then we can just map because there's just one thing, but if there's multiple things, you have to.
And there will be. On Wednesday, the state will have multiple things in it for sure, so you have to be careful about that. But yeah, and I can actually do it both. I would never do this, but you could say category list, cats equals, this dot props dot categories, just like it was before. And I could actually do it twice. So in here, I could do one UL and then an HR and then another UL. And once I do it over the cats, and once I do it over my connection. I should be able to render the same list twice, which would be kind of dumb, but hi, hello. And now one of them is operating off of passed in properties. One of them is operating off of a connection to the store, right? So your results, like I said, you got to make your own decisions when you're making your application, but you can do it either way, right? And this connection to this global store is the magic. So anyway, that is Redux, but we didn't get to the deleter update. I can fill the gaps in there on Wednesday night. I'll add delete and update to this app. We'll run through it real quick. It's no different than what we've done before, but I want to end with that before we jump into the next thing, which is adding the cards to it. Cool? All right, guys, thanks.